Other words we can use for pain.
Somewhere.
Excellent. Comfort. Other words we can use for pleasure. Anything else we can use as a synonym for pleasure?
Sensation.
Hmm?
Sensation.
Excellent work. Dealing with your senses, right? You want to eat a particular type of food? Using your senses, sensation, pleasure, let's say desires. Desires is kind of moving towards something. Comfort, so think of that in this class. The class is an experiment, right? Let's say you're here in this class out of pain. You say, Professor Ross, I find the topic particularly interesting, right? But then you pop up, you're like, oh man, I like that topic. Let me ask a question, let me answer a question, let me be engaged in it. So in this class, our class is a laboratory for psychological experimentation. What you are bored about, what you don't pay attention to, right? The things you are not bored about, and you do, you're like, oh, that's interesting, I'll pay attention again. Think of that, within a 50-minute time frame, how many different behaviors you go through and emotions. Like, I'm disengaged, let me get back on the phone, let me see what's going on with social media, right? And I need to finish that thing for our other class, let me get on the laptop and finish that, let me shoot that email, let me do this up recording. Think of how many different emotions and behavior happen while you are in this class, right? Think of the reason why you're in this class. And if the class self-serves you. Some people may find the class to be particularly boring, redundant, which is fine, right? The class is about being honest with yourself. Right? I'm not trying to deceive you. So keep this in mind. We self-preserve, right? Anything violent happens, first thing you're trying to do is self-preserve self, right? You're trying to preserve yourself. If you don't preserve yourself, then you can't even help others, right? So if anything violent happens, you're gonna run. You're gonna preserve yourself. Maybe if you evaluate a little later, you're like, oh, I'll jump in front of my best friend and, when a shooting happens or something. But even that is argumentative. You may have jumped in front to self-preserve. You may feel something grandiose about yourself, a grandiose sense of self, which is a psychological issue as well too. Pleasure, pain, self-preservation. With that, we can get more into operant learning. No, before that, let me ask one more question. Now we're talking about the self here. Let's include some other people. Let me ask you about some of the factors that happen within a crowd. All right? So now we got self. Crowd. Is this classroom a crowd? Is this a crowd of people? Typically a crowd of people.
Yeah.
Typically a crowd of people are similar interests. Right? You're all here to learn. You're all here to move on to the next phase, or you're all here because obviously this is a general education course, you need the course, right? Be honest. But what to say to learn? What are some other things that happen when the self joins a crowd? Tell me some of the different behaviors that change. Because you are you. Now, if I had a conversation with you individually, and nobody else is in this class, guess what? I'll get a different person. Right? Think of that. You come into the class, and now you're a different person. Like, oh, there's 20 other people here. I'm a little shy. I don't want to ask the questions, right? Or I don't have anything to offer. I'm bored. I could care less. But what are some other changes in behavior when the self becomes part of a crowd? Tell me some things that can happen.
Interact.
Interact different, right? Which we just talked about. You may interact differently with me because there's other people in the class than you would if you came up to me at the end of class and had a discussion, right? Or you may not, or you may still be the same person. Here's an example. Crowd goes to riot. This class goes to riot, right? There's political instability outside, economic instability outside. You guys go out, and you go down to Oak Park, and you start smashing up all the stores. Who here thinks that they would smash up the stores as well? Who here thinks that they wouldn't do that? You believe you wouldn't do that?
Wouldn't smash up stores, no?
Yeah, that you would just commit some violent acts, go against the law, unlawful acts, because the crowd has begun to do that and follow suit. Tell me why you wouldn't do it.
Because popular opinion does not dictate my conscience.
You're not dictated by others, right? That's what you're saying? Who else believes they wouldn't commit the crime? They wouldn't go steal some free stuff, get some free stuff, as a consequence. How come?
Morally, I can't. Like, I see no point of it. It's one thing if you're stealing from like, you know, big brand companies. Another one you're stealing from like a mom and pop shop. Like morally, if I were to steal from like JCPenney, Macy's, Old Navy, Vans, stuff like that, like I wouldn't feel as bad. But the moment that people like steal mom and pop shops, like those are people that are us, and they're trying to survive. Like they don't have insurance for stuff like that to be lost. It comes out of their pockets, and sometimes they can't make it back financially.
So you got particular values, right?
Yeah.
Basically, almost like a Robin Hood thing, right? You're not too keen on large corporate institutions because of the amount of money they make. But mom and pops, you give them a lot of respect because you see the hard work that it takes to, in the community that they serve. You have a particular value system or morals which wouldn't dictate you doing that, right? Could these things be compromised?
Yeah.
Because of a group, let's say pleasure and pain. What's the pain in breaking the law because of the group? Right, possibly you get caught, thrown in jail, possibly police may show up and shoot you and kill you, or the owner and shoot and kill you, right? But can these things, if we take these away, if we believe we take these away, does this change who you are and the things that you would do? Because we see it happen all of the time, all over the world, not just Chicago, not with political situations. But we see people change their behavior, give up their morals, their values, whatever they say they have, their belief systems, because now they have power of a group, you have power of anonymity. You can be anonymous, right? These things can change who you are. You could do things that you don't believe you could do, right? The group could be smaller, it could be a gang of people, it could be your best friends. But these are just things need to consider how we change once other people enter into our lives, as opposed to just being this single individual person with self-preservation, moving away from pain and closer to pleasure. So just ponder on those things as we talk about operant conditioning. So before we talked about classical dealt with the dog, right? The The dog naturally salivates when it sees food. There's a bell inside the environment that the dog is in. The bell means absolutely nothing to the dog. It's in a neutral state. We introduce food, right? And then we also introduce the bell with the food. Now the dog has associated the bell with food, so every time he hears the bell, for any random reason, the dog will begin to salivate, because his brain has associated food with the ringing of a bell. That was classical, right? Classical is using automatic biological phenomena, right? You salivate when you see food, it's automatic, nobody can teach you that, right? But now we've introduced the bell as a teaching and learning mechanism to make association with food and to be able to get the dog to do things we want it to with the instrumentation of this bell. All right, so that was classical. Now we're moving towards operant. Simplest way to understand operant is one of the most famous psychologists ever, right? B.F. Skinner. Anyone ever heard of B.F. Skinner before? Yes? No? Okay. Somebody's heard of B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner introduced something called the Skinner box, which is used in all walks of life now. Governments use it, right? Businesses use it. Scientists use it, psychologists obviously use it. It's to study human behavior by rewards and punishment. Back to pleasure and pain. Back to pleasure and pain. Now with the Skinner box, you have a rat. So now we can throw away the dog, we have the rat. Now the rat is in a box, he's in an environment. And in that environment, there is a lever. Rat has no idea about this lever, right? It's just there. By random, walking around his environment, he hits the lever. The lever triggers a pellet of food to come down. Right? The rat says, "Oh, what's this? You know, look what happened." The rat notices it. He doesn't immediately know that food's gonna come down every time he hits the lever, but he does it over and over again by chance. Eventually, the rat's brain ticks and says, "Oh, wow, there's an association between this lever and a reward. Every time I come, there's this thing that comes up." That, in essence, is the Skinner box to think of. Also, on the flip side, you could think of, well, that was the pleasure side, what's the pain side? So Skinner also introduced on the floor an electric current, right? And there was a light in the box as well, too. So when an electric current happens, the light comes on, and the rat notices it, as he also gets shocked, and he's moving frantically to figure out why he's being shocked and how to stop the shocking. He introduced another lever, and that lever will turn off the shocking to the rat. Hence, we have taught the rat some basic notions, right? Some basic learning principles. Things to do to get a reward, things to do, things not to do, or things to do to stop the punishment. There we go. Things to stop the punishment. That is the basic environment for the rat in the Skinner box as we move towards understanding operant conditioning, which, if it's true, as Skinner implies, that we can predict behavior based off rewards and benefits. We can predict human behavior on an individual level. We can predict human behavior on a society level, as a group level. We can put people within a box, introduce stimulus for rewards, introduce things there to stop pain, and therefore we can organize behavior of control. We can control the behavior of this. Now we've controlled the rat. Right? We introduce more rats, we can control them too. Now if you look at that, you can say, wow, that's pretty impressive, because if that holds true, And what's to say we're not being controlled now, right? That means practically every environment we go on, there are mechanisms of control. Whether it's from a government level, right? Whether it's just from a city level. We have signs, we have, red means go, red means stop. We've implemented all these different things to build up control within a society, to organize a society, and create some sort of order out of chaos, right? That is the premise. Now, if you're really big, having enough resources, yeah, you probably can control an entire country of people, right? By introducing new stimulus, new rewards for certain things, and new punishments for certain things, right? So just keep that in mind. Think of the bigger picture. Well, what if we introduce new punishments for people? Will they stop doing it? And they probably will. Not all, but maybe a majority, right? Maybe 2/3, 1/3 still keep doing it. If we introduce new rewards, well, can we make people do things? Yeah, you probably won't. At the end of the day, it's self-preserving, right? So you can control a whole amount of people in your organization, your company, right? We say there's a company culture here. Those are mechanisms of control. So this is how it's done. Don't deviate from how it's done. So operant conditioning, type of learning which behavior is strengthened if followed by a reinforcer. A reinforcer would be a positive introduction, a positive stimulus to something. Or diminish if followed by a punisher. So we talked about more last week about children, babies, right? Or toddlers. How are you conditioning them to be responsible? You're like, hey, I want my kid to be this type of kid. I want my child to be this type of child. I don't want them to be this other type of child. Well, how do you condition those things, right? You normally take things away. Pain, you punish. Normally reward things that you want them to keep doing. Food, introduce a snack. Food or appraisal, hey, that was awesome, you know? Praise, which even now as adults we love, right? We go on social media and look at likes and things like that. We all love praise. We all want to be glorified in some sense. So the application is the same when it comes to babies. Operant behavior that operates on the environment to produce rewarding or punishing stimulus. We talked about the Skinner box. So the Skinner box can be any environment. Any environment where we put constraints, confinements, and we can introduce these stimulus as experimentation. Concordia can be an experiment. The classroom can be an experiment, a laboratory, if you want to see. In contrast, classical conditioning involves respondent behavior, automatic responses to a stimulus. Right? We talked about classical before with the dog salivating, automated responses. This is the opposite. There's not automated responses. This is very sort of conscious response, an acknowledgement of something there in order to get a benefit, a reward. So the rat knows that the lever is there. He knows now he has to go do something for it. And he has to make a conscious effort to go do something. Operant conditioning, behavior operates on an environment to produce rewarding and punishing stimulus. We talked about organizations associate their own actions with consequences, cause and effect, right? Organisms, we are an organism, so if it apply to rats, it apply to dogs, it also applies to us. Keep that in mind. The human person is an animal. You are an animal by definition, by scientific definition, you are an animal, just like the rest of these guys. Whether you're an ant, a bee, a rat, a dog, doesn't matter. Actions followed by reinforcement increase, those followed by punishment often decrease. So we say if we reinforce an increase of giving the rat more pellets, right? More pellets, the rat's gonna do that behavior even more, even quicker. He's gonna repeat that more and more. So the same goes for us. If we're given reinforcements on an increase, we will also increase our responses to it, and our behavior will change in that. Opposite side, punishments often decrease, right? So yeah, Skinner, keep him in mind, you know, he's just as popular as Sigmund Freud. And he has left a huge impact on society, institutions, governments, and how we just perceive how to make people change behavior through conditioning. We are conditioning people. And you don't even know they expanded on Thorndike was another behaviorist. Skinner box we talked about with the lever. So here they use an example of a cat instead of a rat, right? And we have a lever here. Okay? The cat hits the lever. He hits this lever, this opens up. The chamber opens up, the cat is able to escape. Right? So the cat has acknowledged that there's something that happened as a consequence by touching this thing that people doesn't know nothing about. And from there, he sees that an opening happens. Right? And here is our graph showing the time required to escape in secession, parallel to successful trials in the puzzle box. Right? So here we say at the beginning, taking this rat 240 seconds, right? So let's say 4 minutes, take the rats at the beginning. Over time, the rat decreases the amount of time to escape. The more time he repeats this behavior, to the point where now he's got it. He clearly understands that this thing allows him to escape. At this point, at 20 trials, he's getting out roughly in 30 seconds. Started 4 minutes, now he's at 30 seconds. We've conditioned the cat to be able to understand, to do this thing, to escape as a means of survival. By shaping animals' natural behaviors, Skinner was able to teach these animals unnatural behaviors, such as teaching pigeons to walk in a figure 8, playing ping pong, keep a missile on course by pecking at a screaming target. Right? When we talk about reinforcement, anything that strengthens. A reward is a reinforcement. Reinforcement is substitute for reward. Strengthens the behavior it follows. And here's some of the experiments too with Skinner with a different form of a Skinner box, which you're able to introduce some auditory stimulus, a visual stimulus. There's the reinforcement, which is a reward, the water that comes out, the food dispenser with the pellet, and the bar. Right? And so you can do different things here. You can make the rat exhibit different behaviors based off auditory, based off light, and he could receive either food or water by using this lever. Everyday behaviors are continually reinforced and shaped. We talked about that before, is to shape behavior, it has to be continuous, it has to be persistent, which means if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So things have to be repeated over and over again to become really shaped as a condition of your behavior. Which is why, if you run a business, let's say you run a retail chain or a supermarket, right? You have to have perpetual, continual sales, benefits, things of that nature constantly to keep your customers coming back. If not, their behavior change, they go to your competitors. So then therefore it's a competition of rewards. Who's giving the best rewards? Right? There's business right there. That's gonna create the demand for who shows up to buy your product. Shaping, gradually guiding behavior toward closer and closer approximation of the desired behavior. With the method of successive approximation, Responses that are increasingly closer to the final desired behavior are rewarded, all other responses are ignored, right? Which is typically social media. Instantaneous gratification, right? Instantaneous. Back when I was younger, we had like Napster and AOL, and the internet was so slow, you know, it would take you like a day just to watch like a short clip of a video or something like that. But now with the instant gratification, because the internet is so massive and so quick, we're able to get these stimulus very, very quickly. But it's ultimately changed the behavior of our entire society, right? Which means that I no longer behave the way I do before these things were introduced, the reinforcements were introduced, right? You guys have no clue because you weren't alive back then. But in the future, your behavior will also change because these things will change, right? There'll be something beyond the TikToks and Facebooks, possibly even email and things like that. There'll be a shift, a great shift. In which case, you'll be possibly teaching a course telling you about, you know, how things were back in 2022 at some point. So keep that in mind. So yeah, social media is a great example. Well, the internet, I would say. Social media is a great example. But the internet is a great example of an introduction of something that can change the outcome significantly if society is considered stimulus. Positive reinforcement increases behavior by presenting positive reinforcers. Any stimulus that when presented after a response strengthens the response. Negative reinforcement, i.e. a punishment. But it's still considered a stimulus. You're still stimulating, whether you take something away or not, you're still stimulating something. You're stimulating an emotion. The emotion can be negative, but you're absolutely still creating a stimulus. So stimulus is something that never changes. You just alter it. Ways to increase behaviors, right? Have desirable stimulus. Pet a dog that comes when you call it. Right? You call the dog, you pet it, and give it a reward. Now the dog wags his tail, which is an indicator that it's actually in a good mood. It's an intent showing you like, hey, thank you so much. You're petting me. This feels pleasurable. Or pay someone for work done. Right? We all want to be paid when we do some form of work. Unfortunately, here in school, I wish that we could be paid just for going to school because you guys have done a lot of work. Right? But it's costing you a lot of money to go here. With hopefully the benefit of pleasure of this being able to be utilized to take you to other places, some place more gratifying. Unfortunately, I mean, I don't know if the data holds up to show that behavior of higher education, college, university, etc., tends to lead to the goals or desires or pleasures that people want, right? So ultimately, it goes back to the self, is what you make of it. Because I have a ton of friends that have law degrees that do not practice law, that maybe practice it for a year and they hate it, completely hate it. They probably want an investment banking. I know people with all sorts of bachelor's, master's, even doctorates, that don't work at all within their fields. But maybe if they, you know, the associations you may associate to create a new aspect of what you've learned to be extremely successful in some other way, right? Whether it's entrepreneurship, like, hey, school, I associated the things I learned in school, not just from the professors or the books, but from the people I was around, the environment which I was in, to do something great, right? Associated with my degree, not particularly right in there with the field, but something close by. I got MBA. I did a year of law school, and I don't wanna go to law school, I don't wanna be a lawyer, and that was a lot of money to waste. And then I got PhD, right? So initially, wanted to, be a high-level executive in a business, in which case I was, and I found out to be, not on my own terms, so I wanted to be a business guy first, and I did that, right? Did international business, traveled the world, started these organizations, bought properties, things like that. But then I wanted to always teach, right? I wanted to always teach as a professor, and I don't want a degree in business. Why? Because business is actually subjective. It's a very abstract thing, right? Supply and demand really creates the business. It makes you change how your behavior. So the science of business, even though some parts do have science, marketing, things like that, I didn't find it to be too scientific. Therefore, I took psychology and applied it with business, right? So by default, I'm an international psychologist, which means I go out around the world and I help people develop mental health programs, help them escape poverty, help them to attain human rights. So think of like United Nations, things like that, right? Help people grow themselves psychologically so they can be better, and also transform their societies, their groups, their organizations, their country, things like that. And I find it to be highly interrelated to international business, which my MBA was in. And so at the end of the day, I associated things together to do other things that I never thought I would do. And that's, I think, the key with even the environment of college. You may not work in a particular field you're going to graduate in, but there are some associative things you can do that be beyond your dreams, right? Because a lot of these fields don't pay as much money as you think. And honestly, coming out of, if you're like looking at, in fact, I want to make $60,000, oh man, wait till you find out what $60,000 a year can buy you, which is less than, very little, right? So perception is key. What time is it? 45. Okay, we got 5 minutes, so hang on. Keep that in mind. Associate your degree. You may not work particularly within your field, but you may have an association. Primary condition reinforcers, primary reinforcer can unlearn innately reinforced stimulus, such as one satisfy biological needs, right? Such as like sex during puberty, right? These are sort of unlearned, these things that comes out, right? Innately reinforced stimulus, right? And one day you're non-sexual, next year you're very sexualized and not sure what's going on with your own body. Conditioned secondary stimulus that gains power through association with primary reinforcers. It really depends on which watching, right? So it could be things like online pornography, right? So now you're past puberty, your body's changing, you're not figuring out, you really gravitate towards sexual things. Now you exhibit looking at the reinforcers of online pornography, which may lead to very, very destructive patterns still in sex. Because once again, we said cause and effect, right? Cause may be great, the pleasure may be great at the time you partake in it. The effect or the consequence coming from it may ultimately affect you for the rest of your entire life. In any way, whether it's diseases, viruses, unwanted children, or things of that nature, not good relationships between the person you're having it with, things of that nature, right? So those are conditioned. That's conditioned. Primary is just the stimulus of puberty changing your behavior. Immediate and delayed reinforcers. Immediate occurs immediately after the behavior. Delayed involves a time delay between a desired response and the, so think of this. Let's apply this to sexual behavior, right? You can say immediate would be physical gratification. You can say an orgasm or something. But by doing so, we're not understanding the connection between two human souls, two human bodies, and that there's information that we don't clearly understand. We may be in love with this person now, right? Emotionally attached. That took some 3 days, maybe it took a week, maybe it took a month. We have emotional response because of our immediate gratification for sex and pleasure. Now we're left with this delayed response. Could be a reward if the person wants to be with us, could be pleasure. Or it could be pain, they ghost us. I could be with you, right? Now, we've subjected ourselves to pain. I will leave on that note, and next, so Wednesday, I'm telling the people that didn't show up, earlier that I will upload the 5 bullet points dealing with the questions by the end of the day.